Last month I had a complete shoulder replacement and replaced with metal and what they call an inverse one because the ball and the socket are the other way round. So for the moment I'm crippled and just finding out what I'm going to be able to do with my arm in this position. So I've been experiencing a certain amount of, not exactly humiliation, but very much aware of my limitations and what I expected I ought to be able to do, and other people realizing that I can't do it. And it set me thinking about the whole feeling of humiliation. And I was reminded of a lecture I went to at UCT Summer School. That's the University of Cape Town, has a summer school where you can go and have lectures by visiting professors, things like that. And this one was by a professor of something like African Studies at the University of Cape Town. And he was talking about prejudice, and in particular the sort of institutionalized prejudice. Now you could say on one level, what's he complaining about? Because 30 years ago you couldn't have any black or coloured students in the university, but now not only are there many of them, but there are people like himself employed by the university and offered professorships. So what's the problem? But he was pointing out that for all that sort of apparent change, there's still underlying prejudices, both personal ones, like he said that he's someone who's actually very keen on punctuality. But if ever anyone is late, if ever he's late, people say, oh, that's African timing for you. On the other hand, if he makes a point of being punctual, there's a feeling that he's trying to prove something, that it's not just taken in the ordinary way. But a bigger issue for him was that his department of African Studies was a part of the Department of History. Now, as a one-time, a university based on the European model, the Western model, the history department was very much based on Western history, as you would expect in an English university or an American university. And that was a bit incongruous, you see, because here is African Studies in Africa. You would think that there would be a major department dealing with African Studies, and actually European history, you could even say, should be just part of that, because the colonial impact on South Africa has only been in the past few hundred years. So he was feeling that he wasn't being given the proper status, his department. It was sort of being just put in a corner of another traditional colonial department. Now he explained this very well, very sympathetically, and I felt I knew just what he felt. I could sense that. But the funny thing to me is that some people would say, you can't possibly know what it feels like. You who sort of walked into Cambridge University, sort of one of the most famous universities in the world, on a scholarship and paid for by the government, how could you possibly know what it feels like to be sort of prejudiced against in a South African university? Now, I find that point of view ludicrous. I know exactly how he feels. He feels humiliated, put down. And I know what it feels like to be put down. Everyone has different reasons for feeling that. That is different between him and me, but I know what humiliation feels like. Because, in my case, I was the youngest child, by far. In a family where, I was the one that would be sent up to bed early when the family wanted to have a sort of party downstairs. Or I used to enjoy listening to adult conversations and sometimes wanted to join in. Now, I was very likely to be patted on the head and told to go out and play. We're having a serious discussion here. Now, a lot of people, youngest children, or even if they're not the youngest, have that sort of humiliation. But it was worse for me because I was in the deep country, and most people, you have other younger children than you turning up, and then you can sort of put them down and everything. But for a long time, I was just the baby of the family, and no one was less important than me. So I know what humiliation feels like. It's nothing exceptional, because actually feelings should be the things that unite us, because some expert has worked out that there are only about 20 feelings that we have. It's like having a palette of coloured crayons, and there's just 20 of them, and all the feelings you could possibly have are just mixtures of those 20 things. Now, this professor may not just be feeling humiliation on its own, he may also be feeling anger. But I know what anger feels like, and I've often been in a position of being humiliated and feeling angry about it. So I have every right to say I know how he feels, even though the reasons for the feeling are so totally different. It's a strange idea to me, the idea that using feelings to separate people out, to isolate them. A sort of colonization of feelings, which says, oh, if you're privileged, you can't possibly feel humiliated. You're not allowed to. That doesn't belong to privileged people. You know, if you're rich, you can't possibly feel impoverished. And as I'm suggesting, that's really quite ridiculous, because everyone has experienced every sort of feeling at some time in their life. And to say that you can't feel humiliated if you are privileged is ridiculous. Just think of the Netflix series of Harry and Meghan. There he is a peer of the realm, you know, heir to the throne, that sort of thing. But it's very clear in that he felt very humiliated at times in his life. I know that it's interesting to me in some sort of New Age workshops, prosperity workshops, people who think they're very poor and want to become rich. One of the exercises they do is feel what it's like to be rich. And many people say, I can't do that. I've never been rich. You know, I've been poor all my life. And the answer to that is, everyone has had some experience of feeling rich. Think back to your childhood, when an uncle, you're 4 years old and an uncle gives you your first £1 note. Wow, you feel you've got all the money in the world. £1, what you could buy with £1, the sweets you could get and everything. That's what it's like to feel rich. It's the same feeling as a millionaire has. It's a common thing. Everyone has had something like that at some time in their life, however poor they are. Someone picked up a £1 coin in the street. Wow, you know, it's my lucky day, I feel rich. So that idea that sort of feelings are exclusive and certain people are not allowed to have them, to me is really quite ridiculous. Feelings really have the power to unite us at best. Take a feeling like joy. You're at a party and everyone's dancing and looking happy, and there's someone dancing on their own, looking absolutely blissed out. And you feel attracted, so you go up and stand in front of them and sort of get in time with them and everything. And with luck, they will recognize you, and you'll dance together and you'll experience joy together, and it'll bring you together, maybe in friendship. Now, it does take courage, because of course that person might glare at you and angrily turn away, you know, thinking you're trying to sort of hit on them or something. So that can be, it takes a little bit of a risk. Take the opposite, something like sorrow. You're at a funeral of an old friend that you haven't seen for years, and there, sitting alone, is someone looking absolutely miserable, and you're feeling bad yourself. And you can say, do you mind if I sit beside you? And you can sit together, and then, and again this takes courage, at some point you might place your hand on their shoulder and start talking to them. Again, it takes courage, because they might angrily turn away and say, just leave me alone, please. But that feeling of shared sorrow, again, could bring you together, could unite you. Now, it's a funny thing to me, because I think about what a common feeling anger is. And I'm imagining a situation where two people are listening to the news, something about, Republicans versus Democrats or something like that, and woke people versus Trump or whatever, and they're both feeling angry. One of them, because he's a Trump supporter and is feeling furious about the things the woke people are saying. The other one, who is a really woke person, is livid about what Trump is saying. Now, it'd be rather good, wouldn't it, if they could say, hey, we're both angry. Hey, I know what it feels like to feel like that. Yes, that's it. And somehow a friendship come out of that. At the very least, they might decide to have a fight, Hey, let's wrestle. Let's do arm wrestling or something, I hate your guts. Let's work it out. Or let's have a sort of sports conflict between these two people. It's a very nice idea, and it reminds me of Aleister Crowley's saying of "As brothers fight ye." So basically what I'm saying is that, the idea that feelings belong to certain groups of people and they're not allowed for other people, to me is utterly ridiculous. And we should really try to look to feelings as a way of uniting people rather than separating them, because there are plenty of intellectual reasons for separating people. But the feelings underlying are what could unite us. Now, I particularly wanted to focus on humiliation. And the question is, what can one do when you've been thoroughly humiliated? Whether it's put down by a university department that snubs you, or whether someone insults you in the street because of your colour or your accent or whatever. What can one do? And basically I see there are two responses which both can be effective. Now, the commonest one is to be victim, the social response. You can say, the police treated me like a dog, and utterly humiliated me, and start a sort of campaign, sort of hash humiliation or something, or hash put down, and put across your story and get a lot of people sympathising and create a movement. And that's a very successful and powerful thing to do, because being a victim is a very powerful position. After all, in our culture, our God was humiliated and crucified, and that's a godlike thing to be crucified. The other thing is a more personal, I would say a more sort of warrior spirit. You see, if someone humiliates you and puts you down, basically they are underestimating you. You may be a very clever but scruffy person and rather poor, and they're saying, go away, we're not interested. I have written quite a few books, and mostly I've published them myself. But I've always thought it would be nice, when I wrote something like Words Made Flesh, I felt initially, I changed it later, but initially I was writing it for a general publisher, because I thought here was an interesting new idea, that the world could be a virtual reality, the universe could be a virtual reality. But I couldn't find any literary agent or publisher that was the least bit interested. Most of them just simply sent it back without any comment. One literary agent said to me, I said to him, but this is an ideas book. And he said, publishers don't like ideas books. I said, but, what about, I think it was Brief History of Time, by Hawkins. I think that was out then. I said, what about that? He said, that's not an ideas book. It's a book by an incredibly brilliant cripple. That's what sells it. You've got to have a gimmick. If you want to write about ideas, don't write about the ideas, write about the people who have those ideas, then the publisher will accept it. And as it was me having the ideas, I didn't think I could do that. So that's very much of a put down to me, and very humiliating. Even worse, I remember sending some new idea for a book to an agent and telling him about my other books I've done, and that they sell well. And he said, again, letter came straight back. He wasn't interested in seeing any of my work. He said, I'm sorry, we don't deal with people who've self-published. Complete dismissal. So I felt, you see, I was being underestimated. They didn't even bother to read my books to see if there was any value of them. The fact I'd self-published meant I wasn't worth looking at. That's the sort of thing that's very humiliating, to be underestimated to that level. Underestimated because of your skin colour, because of your poverty, because of your lack of style, because of your lack of education, because of your accent or whatever. But the interesting thing about that is that if instead you look at it from a tactical, strategic point of view, one of the greatest advantages you can have in strategy is to be underestimated. I'm sure this is written about in Sun Tzu, The Art of War, whatever. If the enemy underestimates you, you have a huge advantage. And this really is what's happened in the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia, a much bigger country with many more armaments and a massive number of people, they underestimated Ukraine. They thought that was a country of, a bit sort of gone soft with Western ideas. After all, they'd elected a comedian to be their premier. I mean, how ridiculous can you get? They thought that they could just walk in and liberate them from this lousy, rotten government they had. They completely underestimated the determination, the skill, the extent to which the Iranians valued their country and treasured it and would fight for it. Similarly, the Russians underestimated how Europe. They saw Europe again as a fragmented, they all get to each other's throats, they would never come together. They underestimated how under threat Europe could unite. Those things was a huge disadvantage for Russia, which they're still fighting against. They're still having to catch up on that. So to be underestimated, if you look at it from the right angle, is actually a great opportunity. I think there are many examples of that, and one that I read about recently was dyslexia. Now, I think things are getting better in the schools now, that people are recognising dyslexia as a sort of a genuine handicap, that things can be done about it, it can be recognised, people can be sort of helped if they have dyslexia. But for a long time, to be dyslexic at school was a real humiliation, put down. You got teased by all fellow people because you can't spell and you say funny things, and teachers think you're stupid and put you at the back of the class, and so on and so forth. But you see, if you look at the statistics of very successful people in the world, top businessmen and company founders and inventors, that the proportion of them who are dyslexic is far higher than the average. It's as though being dyslexic is almost an advantage. And I think the theory about that is that if you're dyslexic, you are different. You don't just get all the same privileges and go through the same treadmill as all the other pupils. You have to find your own way of doing things to some extent, which means you're a standout. And in business case, it means you may think differently and think differently, and therefore create something which bypasses the normal routes. This is true. A very common thing is people who feel really put down because they're intelligent but disadvantaged. They don't get into university because they don't have rich parents or sort of family connections and things like that. They look a bit scruffy, and so, or they don't talk proper, and so they don't get admitted. They get sort of brushed aside, don't get into the waiting list, and that is very humiliating. And you might feel you want to give up in that case. But if instead you think in terms of, if I'm underestimated, this could be my advantage, and you become an autodidact, you learn business management from books in the library, you do things your own way, you teach yourself, you perhaps sign into free websites and things like that, you build your own education. And those sort of people very often are the ones that come out on top, because they haven't been given the standard spiel. I'm sure every business school tries to teach creativity and original thinking, but the fact is you've been through a sort of a sausage machine, albeit a very high quality one, and you've been standardized to a certain extent. And those people who have been cast out of that system, but have seen it as a possibility to actually define their own path, to beat their own path, do things their way, they're the ones who can often come out on top. So that's my sort of thought about humiliation. It's a common feeling. Everyone has it at some point or other, even if they're the top of the stack. Apparently, everyone knows what humiliation is. It's a way of getting people sorry for you and becoming a victim, and that can be a very powerful position. You can start a movement. You can get everyone ganging up for you. Laws can be changed and things like that, in order to combat that feeling of that particular feeling of humiliation you have. Or on the other hand, as an individual, it's a chance to sort of break out of the norm, get out of the mold, and create something new and surprise the world.